crash of crystal against marble was loud, but the silence that followed was deafening. In the center of the grand hall of the Silver Moon Pack, Lilith Vane stood frozen, wine dripping from her apron like fresh blood. Looming over her was Lady Alara Ashriver, the Alpha King's matriarch, a woman whose sneer could strip the paint off walls. The court held its breath, expecting a beg for mercy. Instead, Lilith lifted her chin. She didn't apologize in common. She didn't stutter in the modern tongue. She opened her mouth and spoke a dialect dead for 1,000 years, a sound like grinding stones and storm winds. And for the first time in history, the Alpha King, Soren Ashriver, looked terrified. The smell of the Gilded Claw restaurant was a mixture of overly expensive truffle oil, searing Wagyu beef, and the metallic tang of fear. It was the premier dining establishment in the neutral territory of Oakhaven, a demilitarized zone where rival wolf packs, wealthy vampires, and high-ranking fae mingled under an uneasy truce. For Lilith Vane, it was just a cage. She adjusted the collar of her uniform, which was itching her neck. The fabric was stiff, meant to make the staff look like invisible, well-dressed furniture. That was exactly what Lilith wanted to be. Invisible. She was 22, with hair the color of wet asphalt and eyes that she kept strictly lowered. To the manager, a sweaty, anxious beta wolf named Mr. Henderson, she was reliable but forgettable. To the customers, she was a pair of hands that delivered champagne and cleared plates. "Table 4 needs a refill on the 82 vintage," Henderson barked, snapping his fingers near Lilith's ear. "And fix your hair, a loose strand." Disgraceful. "Yes, sir," Lilith murmured. Her voice was soft, a deliberate rasp she had practiced for years to hide her natural timbre. She moved through the dining floor with the grace of a shadow. She had to be careful. The scent blockers she wore were industrial strength, burning her skin where she applied them at her wrists and throat. They masked everything, her heritage, her rank, her history. In this world, an Omega without a pack was a target. A rogue with a secret was a corpse. Tonight, the air in the Gilded Claw felt heavier than usual. The barometer of the supernatural world was dropping. Rumors had been swirling in the kitchen all week. The Ashriver pack was coming. The Ashrivers were not just a pack, they were the pack. The royal line, descendants of the first wolf. They ruled the northern territories with a mix of brutal efficiency and ancient magic. Their king, Soren Ashriver, was a figure of nightmares and daydreams, rumored to be 7 feet of pure muscle and lethal instinct, a man who had crushed rebellions before breakfast. But it wasn't the king that made the staff tremble. It was the matriarch, Lady Alara, Soren's grandmother and the keeper of the old ways. She was known to execute servants for spilling tea. "Lilith!" A hiss came from the service station. It was Mara, a young waitress with bright eyes and shaking hands. "They're here. The motorcade just pulled up. I can't do it. I can't serve the high table. I'll faint. I swear I'll drop everything." Lilith looked at the younger girl. Mara was sweet, a Delta wolf with a weak constitution. If she served the Ashrivers, she'd likely trigger a diplomatic incident just by breathing too loud. "Breathe, Mara," Lilith said, her hand resting briefly on the girl's shoulder. "It's just dinner. They eat, they drink, they leave. They are just flesh and bone." "They are monsters in silk," Mara whispered, eyes wide. "Please, Lilith, you have nerves of steel. Take my section. I'll scrub dishes for a month, please." Lilith hesitated. Being close to high-ranking alphas was dangerous. Their senses were sharper, their instincts honed to find lies. If Soren Ashriver looked too closely at her, if his wolf sensed the deception beneath the scent blockers. But looking at Mara's pale face, Lilith knew the girl would doom herself. "Fine," Lilith said, tightening her apron strings. "Go to the back, prep the desserts, stay out of sight." "You're an angel," Mara sobbed, fleeing toward the kitchen. Lilith turned toward the grand double doors of the restaurant just as they swung open. The ambient chatter of the restaurant died instantly. It wasn't a hush. It was a vacuum. The Ashrivers had arrived. The energy shifted, becoming charged with ozone and static. First came the guards, men and women who moved with predatory fluidity. Then, the Matriarch. Lady Alara was small, withered, yet she walked with the weight of a mountain. She wore black lace and diamonds that looked like frozen tears. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the room for flaws, for weakness, and behind her, the Alpha King. Soren Ashraver was everything the rumors promised, and worse. He was strikingly tall, wearing a bespoke suit that struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. His hair was black, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome but cold as a glacier. His eyes were gold, burning, molten gold. He didn't look at the room. He looked through it. He looked bored. Lilith felt a strange thrum in her chest, a vibration against her ribs that had nothing to do with fear. She clamped down on it, forcing her heart rate to slow. I am furniture, she told herself. I am glass. I am nothing. She picked up the tray of water crystal goblets and walked into the lion's den. The high table was set on a raised dais, separated from the common rabble by velvet ropes and fear. As Lilith approached, the pressure in the air increased. It was the alpha aura, Soren's dominance rolling off him in waves. Most humans would have felt nauseous. Weak wolves would have instinctively bared their throats. Lilith just felt a headache coming on. She had spent a lifetime building mental walls against this kind of pressure. She approached the table from the left, moving silently. The matriarch, Lady Alara, was criticizing the silverware. Tarnished, Alara spat, her voice a dry crackle. We travel 300 miles to the neutral zone, and they serve us with tin. It's silver, grandmother, Soren said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth like aged whiskey, but laced with an exhaustion that spoke of endless politics. And we are here for the treaty signing, not the cutlery. Details matter, Soren, Alara snapped. The decline of standards is the first sign of a falling empire. If they cannot polish a fork, how can they police a border? Lilith reached the table. Sparkling or still, my lady? She asked, keeping her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. Alara stopped talking. She turned her head slowly, looking at Lilith's waist, then her chest, then her chin. She didn't look at Lilith's face. To Alara, a waitress didn't have a face. Still, Alara said, dismissing her with a wave of a manicured hand. And be quick about it. The smell of the kitchen is clinging to your uniform. It wasn't true. Lilith's uniform was pristine, but she nodded. Of course. She moved to pour. As she tilted the crystal pitcher, Soren shifted in his seat. His knee bumped the table leg, a tiny, imperceptible movement for a human, but enough to send a vibration through the wood. At that exact moment, a waiter passing behind Lilith tripped. He didn't fall, but he stumbled, his elbow knocking into Lilith's lower back. It was a chain reaction of bad luck. Lilith compensated instantly, her reflexes supernatural, catching the pitcher before it could shatter. But a splash, a single, traitorous arc of water, escaped the rim. It landed on Lady Alara's hand. The restaurant went silent. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on the world. The pianist in the corner stopped mid-chord. Lady Alara looked at the droplet of water on her gloved hand as if it were acid. Slowly, terrifically slowly, she looked up at Lilith. You, Alara whispered. The word carried across the room. Lilith stepped back, clutching the tray. My apologies, Lady Alara. It was an accident. Do not touch me, Alara barked, standing up. The sudden movement knocked her chair back. You clumsy, incompetent mongrel. Do you know what this lace costs? Do you know who sits before you? Soren sighed, rubbing his temples. Grandmother, it's water. It will dry. It is the disrespect. Alara shrieked, her eyes flashing a wolfish yellow. The incompetence! In my day, servants who could not pour a drink were whipped until their hands learned steadiness. She turned her fury fully on Lilith. The matriarch stepped closer, sniffing the air. Her nose wrinkled. And you smell fake, Alara sneered. Chemicals, burnt flowers. What are you hiding, girl? Are you some diseased rogue trying to pass as civilized? Lilith's grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles turned white. Don't react, she screamed internally. Take the abuse. Survive. I apologize, my lady, Lilith said, lowering her head. I will fetch a towel. You will fetch nothing. Alara grabbed a glass of red wine from the table, a heavy, rich Cabernet, and with a shocking speed for her age, she threw the contents at Lilith. The cold liquid splashed across Lilith's face and chest, soaking the white apron red. It looked like a massacre. The wine stung her eyes, dripping down her chin. "Now," Alara sneered, satisfied. "Now you match your station. Filthy." Soren stood up abruptly. "Enough," he commanded. His voice cracked the floorboards. "Grandmother, sit down. You are making a scene." "I am teaching a lesson," Alara countered, though she flinched slightly at Soren's tone. She looked back at Lilith, expecting tears, expecting the girl to run, but Lilith didn't run. She stood there, wine dripping from her eyelashes. Something inside her, a cage she had kept locked since she was a child, rattled. The humiliation wasn't what triggered it. It was the word mongrel. It was the arrogance of a lineage that claimed superiority while acting like beasts. Lilith wiped the wine from her eyes. She looked up. For the first time, she looked Lady Alara directly in the eye. Then, she shifted her gaze to Soren. Soren froze. When their eyes met, the Alpha King felt a jolt go down his spine, a primal recognition that made no sense. This girl, smelling of chemicals and cheap soap, had eyes that held the depth of an abyss. "You should learn to hold your tongue, old woman," Lilith said. Her voice wasn't the raspy whisper anymore. It was clear, resonant, and cold. The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Alara's mouth fell open. "What did you say to me?" "I said," Lilith continued, "that nobility is not found in the blood but in the bearing, and you bear yourself like a spoiled pup." Alara's face turned purple. "Guards, seize this bitch, rip her throat out." Two massive enforcement wolves stepped forward, their hands shifting into claws. "Wait," Soren said, stepping around the table. He moved between the guards and Lilith. He wasn't protecting her. He was studying her. He was an apex predator looking at a puzzle. "You have a death wish, girl?" Lilith looked at the king. She saw the curiosity in his gold eyes, but also the threat. She knew she couldn't fight her way out, not physically. But there were other ways to fight, ways that the Ashrivers had forgotten. The tension in the room was a physical weight. The guards hesitated, confused by their king's intervention. Lady Alara was trembling with rage, clutching her pearls as if strangling them. "Soren!" Alara screeched. "She insulted the Matriarch! The law demands blood!" "The law demands order," Soren said dismissively, never taking his eyes off Lilith. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. He towered over her, a wall of heat and power. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Lilith said defiantly. "Nobody doesn't look an Alpha King in the eye without flinching," Soren noted softly. He reached out, his hand hovering near her chin. "And nobody doesn't have the posture of a warrior." Alara couldn't handle the delay. "If you won't do it, I will curse her myself. I banish you, girl. By the rights of the moon, I declare you unclean." Alara raised her hands, beginning a chant in the modern high tongue, a ceremonial language used by elites to intimidate the lower classes. It was a bastardized version of the ancient magic, clumsy and full of mispronunciations, but effective enough to terrify the staff. "Ego te damno, spiritus malus," Alara chanted, her voice shrill. Lilith listened. The incorrect grammar grated on her ears like nails on a chalkboard. It was an insult to the history of their kind. The wine on her skin felt sticky, but the fire in her blood was burning hot. She couldn't stop it. The instinct took over. Lilith laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "You pronounce it wrong," she said. Alara choked on her chant. "Excuse me?" "The stress falls on the second syllable," Lilith said calmly. "And you are invoking the spirit of rot, not the spirit of banishment. You are essentially cursing yourself to smell like bad eggs." Soren's lips twitched, a shadow of a smile or a snarl. "How dare you mock our holy language?" Alara screamed. "You, a gutter rat!" "It is not your language," Lilith said. Her voice dropped an octave. The air in the room suddenly grew cold. The lights flickered. "It belongs to the ancients, and they do not like to be misquoted." Lilith straightened her spine. The illusion of the invisible waitress vanished. She took a breath, drawing in the magic that lingered in the earth beneath the floorboards. When she spoke next, it wasn't in common. It wasn't in the modern high tongue. It was old Valoria. Ka resh vatun, elara, solve nikan dro. The words didn't just vibrate in the air. They vibrated in the bones of everyone present. It was a language of guttural clicks and melodic vowels, a sound that mimicked the cracking of glaciers and the howling of wind through canyons. It was the language the first alphas spoke when they made pacts with the moon goddess. The effect was instantaneous. The werewolf guards dropped to their knees, not out of choice, but because their wolves forced them down. It was a submission reflex hardwired into their DNA, responding to the authority of the sound. Lady Alara turned pale white. She staggered back, clutching her chest. That is impossible. That is a dead tongue. Only the high priests, Soren Ashriver didn't kneel, but he stumbled back a step, his eyes widening so much the gold eclipsed the white. He felt the words hit his chest like a physical blow. Ka resh vartun. Silence your tongue, Alara. Solve nikan dro. Your pride smells of rot, Lilith continued, her eyes glowing with a faint violet luminescence that cut through the brown contacts she wore. She pointed a wine-stained finger at the matriarch. Makan, she commanded, sit. Lady Alara, the most powerful woman in the Northern Territories, sat. She collapsed into her chair as if her strings had been cut. She looked terrified. The silence that followed was total. No one breathed. The power of the command lingered in the air, tasting of ozone and ancient dust. Lilith blinked, and the violet light faded from her eyes. The adrenaline crashed. She realized what she had done. She had just used the royal voice, the voice of dominion, in front of the king. She had revealed herself. Slowly, she looked at Soren. The Alpha King was no longer looking at her with boredom or curiosity. He was looking at her with a terrifying intensity. He looked like a starving man who had just found a feast. Say that again, Soren whispered. He stepped forward, ignoring his grandmother whimpering in the chair. He reached out and grabbed Lilith's wrist. His grip was iron, but his thumb brushed her pulse point, checking the frantic rhythm of her heart. Who taught you that? Soren demanded, his voice rough. That language has not been spoken since the Great War. Who are you? Lilith looked at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. The connection between them flared, hot, dangerous, electric. I'm just a waitress, Lilith whispered, her voice trembling as the reality set in. Liar, Soren growled. He pulled her closer, bringing her wine-soaked apron against his pristine suit. He leaned down, inhaling deeply at her neck, trying to burn through the scent blockers with sheer will. You are no waitress, and you are coming with me. Lilith yanked her arm back, but he didn't let go. I have a shift to finish. Your shift is over, Soren declared, his voice booming through the silent hall. He looked at the trembling manager, Mr. Henderson, who was cowering behind the bar. She is fired. I am buying her contract. Sir? Henderson squeaked. I am taking her, Soren said, his eyes locking onto Lilith's. She has insulted the matriarch. She must answer for her crimes at the palace. That is not what this is, Lilith hissed. You just want to know how I spoke the words. Soren smiled then. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that promised trouble. I want to know everything, little mystery. I want to know why a waitress speaks with the voice of a queen. He turned to his guards, who were slowly getting back to their feet, looking shaken. Secure the perimeter, Soren ordered, and get the car. We are leaving, now. He didn't release Lilith's wrist. He began to drag her toward the exit. Wait, Lilith protested, digging her heels in. You can't just kidnap me. It's an arrest, Soren corrected smoothly, though his thumb caressed her skin again. But feel free to call it what you like. As they reached the doors, Lady Alara found her voice again. She is a witch, a demon. Soren, do not bring that thing into our home. Soren paused at the threshold. He looked back at his grandmother, then down at the girl who had silenced a room with 2 sentences. She isn't a demon, grandmother, Soren said softly, so only Lilith could hear. She's the most interesting thing to happen to me in 100 years. He pulled Lilith out into the rain, the heavy doors of the gilded claw swinging shut behind them, sealing her fate. The game of hiding was over. The hunt had begun. The interior of the royal motorcade was silent, a silence far heavier than the rain hammering against the bulletproof glass. Soren Ashreaver sat across from Lilith, his long legs stretched out, taking up most of the space in the armored SUV. He hadn't spoken since he threw her into the vehicle. He simply watched her. Lilith huddled in the corner, her uniform damp and clinging to her skin, the smell of stale wine filling the small space. She shivered, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. The scent blockers were failing. The rain and the wine had washed away the chemical barrier, and she knew that every second she spent in this enclosed space, Soren was unraveling her layers. "You're not trembling," Soren observed, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. Lilith looked out the window at the blurred lights of Oakhaven speeding by. "Is that a requirement for being arrested?" "Most people tremble in the presence of the Alpha King," Soren said, leaning forward. His gold eyes caught the passing streetlights, flashing like predator eyes in the dark, especially after assaulting his grandmother. "I didn't assault her," Lilith said, turning to face him. Her fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but her pride was stronger. "I educated her." Soren let out a short, sharp laugh. "Education? Is that what you call using a voice that hasn't been heard since the fall of the First Empire?" He rested his elbows on his knees, his face inches from hers. "Do you know what the council will do when they hear of this? They will want to dissect you." "Then you should have let me run," Lilith countered. "And miss the show?" Soren shook his head. "No, you intrigue me, Lilith Vane, or whatever your real name is." He inhaled deeply. "The blockers are fading. I smell ozone and cedar and something metallic, like blood on a sword." Lilith stiffened. That was the scent of her lineage, a scent she'd spent 10 years scrubbing from her skin. "It's just the kitchen grease," she lied. "Stop lying," Soren commanded. The air in the car pressurized, a low-level alpha command. "Submit." Lilith felt the pressure against her skull, a dull ache urging her to lower her eyes, to bare her neck. But her wolf, buried deep beneath layers of trauma and discipline, didn't bow. It snarled. She held his gaze. "I am not one of your subjects, Soren. Do not use the voice on me." Soren recoiled slightly, shock registering on his features. An omega, even a delta, should have crumpled. For her to resist a direct command meant she was ranked, high ranked. "You're an alpha," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "A female alpha hiding in a restaurant." "I am what I need to be to survive," Lilith said, her voice dropping. "And if you take me to your palace, you are bringing a storm into your home. Your grandmother was right about one thing. I am dangerous to you." Good," Soren said, settling back into the leather seat, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "I've been bored for a very long time." The car slowed as they approached the massive iron gates of the Ashriver estate. Obsidian Hall. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress of black stone and glass, built into the side of a mountain, looming over the city like a judgment. As the gates groaned open, Lilith felt a sense of doom settle over her. She had walked into the lion's den, and the lion had locked the door. Lilith was not taken to a dungeon. She was taken to the East Wing, the royal guest quarters, which was arguably worse. It was a prison of silk and velvet. The room was larger than the entire apartment she rented in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the misty valleys of the Northern Territory. The bed was draped in silver furs, but the door had no handle on the inside, and 2 royal guards stood stationed in the hallway. She had stripped off the ruined uniform and showered, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, trying to reapply the last of her scent blockers. But the bottle was empty. She dressed in the clothes they had provided, a simple silk tunic and trousers in slate gray. She was pacing the room when the door opened. It wasn't Soren. It was a man Lilith recognized from the history books, High Priest Valerius. He was ancient, his skin like parchment, wearing robes of deep crimson. He carried a wooden box. Behind him, Soren entered, having changed into casual black attire that somehow made him look more lethal than the suit. "The girl," Valerius croaked, peering at Lilith through thick spectacles. "This is the vessel of the old tongue." "She is a person, Valerius," Soren said, closing the door. "Her name is Lilith." "Names are masks," the priest dismissed. He set the box on the heavy oak table. "The king tells me you spoke the Ka-Resh. Impossible. The vocal cords of modern wolves cannot shape the sounds without rupturing." "I have a good throat," Lilith said dryly, crossing her arms. "We shall see," Valerius said. He opened the box. Inside lay a jagged shard of metal, glowing with a faint pulsing blue light. It looked like a piece of a star that had fallen to earth. "This is a fragment of the moonstone, the first matriarch's touchstone. It reacts to truth. It reacts to bloodline." Soren stepped forward. "We need to know what you are, Lilith. If you are a spy, a threat, or something else, touch the stone." Lilith stared at the shard. She knew what it was. It was a Veritas shard. If she touched it, it wouldn't just glow. It would sing. It would broadcast her lineage to everyone in the room. "And if I refuse?" "Then you remain a prisoner," Soren said, his voice devoid of cruelty but firm as steel. "I cannot let a potential weapon walk free in my territory." Lilith looked at Soren. There was no malice in his eyes, only a desperate need for answers. He was a king trying to protect his people. She respected that. She sighed. "If it breaks, I'm not paying for it," Valerius scoffed. "The moonstone is indestructible." Lilith reached out. Her hand hovered over the blue light. She took a breath, centering herself, pulling her aura tight around her core, trying to dampen the signal. She touched the stone. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the blue light turned blindingly white. A hum began, low at first, then rising in pitch until the glass in the windows rattled. Valerius gasped. "The purity! It's blinding!" The stone began to vibrate violently on the table. The white light shifted, swirling with veins of gold and violet, the colors of royalty, the colors of the ancients. Crack! A spiderweb fracture appeared in the center of the indestructible stone. Lilith snatched her hand back as if burned. The humming stopped. The light died, leaving the stone dull and broken in two pieces. The silence in the room was absolute. Valerius was shaking. He looked at Lilith with a mixture of horror and reverence. It shattered. The capacity, it overloaded the matrix. "Who are you?" Lilith rubbed her fingertips, which were tingling. "I told you I'm nobody." Soren stared at the broken stone, then at Lilith. The realization hitting him was evident in the widening of his eyes. The stone hadn't just reacted to power, it had reacted to authority. "Leave us!" Soren commanded, his voice rough. "But sire," Valerius stammered, "the prophecy." "Leave us!" Soren roared, his alpha power flaring, shaking the room. The priest grabbed his box and fled. Soren turned to Lilith. He didn't approach her this time. He looked wary. "You aren't just an alpha," he said softly. "The stone only breaks for the blood of the founders. You are royal." Lilith turned away, walking to the window. "There are no royals left besides the Ashrivers. You wiped them all out in the Unification Wars." "We thought we did," Soren corrected. He walked up behind her, close enough that she could feel his body heat, but he didn't touch her. "Which house? Valoria, Nightshade, Stormborn?" Lilith closed her eyes. "Does it matter? I have no army. I have no land. I serve appetizers, Soren. That is my kingdom." "It matters," Soren whispered, his breath stirring the hair at her ear, "because if you are royal, then you are my equal. And if you are my equal—" Biru, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air between them was crackling with the unspoken tension of the mate bond. It was pulling at them, a magnetic force trying to snap two heavy objects together. "You should send me away," Lilith said, her voice trembling slightly. "Before your grandmother finds out. She won't stop at banishment next time. She'll kill me." "Let her try," Soren growled, a dark promise. "You're under my protection now. No one touches you." He reached out, his hand hesitating, then gently covering hers on the windowsill. The contact sent a shockwave through Lilith's arm, hot and possessive. "I will find out the truth, Lilith," he promised. "But tonight, sleep. You are safe here." He turned and left the room, locking the door again. Lilith stared at her hand where he had touched her. Safe? No. She was in more danger now than she had ever been in the restaurant, because the Alpha King wasn't just hunting her secrets anymore. He was hunting her heart. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 3 times. The witching hour. Lilith lay awake in the massive bed, staring at the canopy. The silk sheets felt like a net. She couldn't sleep. Her instincts were screaming. The hair on her arms was standing up, the same way it did right before a thunderstorm broke. She sat up. The room was bathed in moonlight, quiet and still. But the silence was wrong. It was too heavy. Lilith slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. She moved to the door and listened. The guards outside were breathing rhythmically, but their heartbeats were slow. Too slow. Drugged. Someone was coming. She scanned the room for a weapon. Nothing. The ash rivers were thorough. No letter openers, no heavy vases. She moved to the center of the room, closing her eyes, extending her senses beyond the physical. The old ways weren't just about fancy words. They were about connection to the elements. She felt the air currents in the hallway shift. The lock on her door clicked. It was a sound so soft a human wouldn't have heard it. The door eased open. A figure slipped inside. It was clad in a suit that seemed to drink the light. A shadow walker. An assassin of the highest order, magically veiled to be invisible to the eye and nose. But Lilith didn't use her eyes. She felt the disturbance in the ether. The assassin moved toward the bed, a dagger raised, a blade of obsidian glass coated in wolfsbane. Lilith waited until he was 3 steps away. "You're attacking an empty bed," she said calmly from the shadows of the corner. The assassin spun around, the veil dropping in his surprise. He was a beta, nondescript with dead eyes. He didn't speak. He lunged. He was fast, blurring with speed. But Lilith had been trained by the last sword dancers of the Valorian mountains. She sidestepped his thrust, the blade missing her ribs by an inch. She grabbed his wrist, using his momentum to slam him into the wall. He grunted but twisted, lashing out with a hidden boot knife. It grazed Lilith's thigh, tearing the silk trousers and drawing a line of hot blood. The scent of her blood hit the air, rich, ancient, and potent. The assassin faltered for a microsecond, intoxicated by the smell. That was all Lilith needed. She didn't punch him. She opened her mouth and spoke a word, not a sentence, just a syllable of force. Drac! The sonic impact hit the assassin in the chest like a sledgehammer. He flew backward, smashing through the heavy oak table, splintering it into kindling. The noise woke the castle. Down the hall, Soren had been pacing his study, unable to settle. The moment he heard the crash and the sharp copper scent of Lilith's blood, his wolf took over. He tore the door off its hinges, sprinting down the corridor. He burst into Lilith's room, his claws fully extended, his eyes burning red. He found the assassin trying to crawl out of the wreckage of the table. Lilith was standing over him, bleeding from her leg, her eyes glowing that terrifying violet. "Soren!" she shouted, not looking at him. "Don't kill him! He has answers!" But Soren wasn't listening to logic. He saw the blood on Lilith's leg. He saw the weapon in the man's hand. With a roar that shook the foundations of the palace, Soren crossed the room. He didn't just attack the assassin, he dismantled him. It was a blur of violence that ended with the assassin thrown through the plate glass window, plummeting into the valley below. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the howling wind coming through the shattered window. Soren stood heaving, his chest rising and falling, fighting to regain control. He turned slowly to Lilith. The red in his eyes faded back to gold, filled with panic. "You're bleeding," he choked out. He rushed to her, dropping to his knees. He didn't care about the assassin. He didn't care about the destroyed room. His hands hovered over the cut on her thigh. "It's a scratch," Lilith said, though she was swaying. The wolfsbane on the blade was potent. It was making her vision swim. "It's wolfsbane," Soren growled. He ripped the sleeve of his own shirt, tying it tightly around her leg as a tourniquet. "Stay with me, Lilith. Look at me." He scooped her up into his arms effortlessly. She felt small against his chest, fragile. "Who sent him?" Lilith whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "Was it Alara?" "I don't know," Soren said, his voice grim as he carried her out of the room, shouting for medics. But whoever it was just made a fatal mistake. He looked down at her, and for the first time, Lilith saw the walls around his heart completely collapse. "They tried to take my mate," Soren whispered into her hair. Lilith stiffened, even through the poison's haze. He had said it. The word was out. "I'm not your mate," she mumbled weakly, fighting the pull. "I'm just a waitress." "We are past lies, Lilith," Soren said, kicking open the doors to the infirmary wing. "You are mine, and I'm going to burn the world down to find who did this." As darkness took her, Lilith had one final thought. The prophecy. The union of the Ash River and the Valorian lines would not bring peace. It would bring the end of days. She had to leave. She had to run. But as Soren's arms tightened around her, she knew it was already too late. Lilith woke to the smell of antiseptic and sandalwood. The pain in her leg was a dull throb, buried under layers of magical healing salves. She opened her eyes to see a ceiling painted with frescoes of wolves hunting stags, a violent, beautiful tapestry that mirrored her current reality. She tried to sit up, but a heavy hand gently pushed her back down. "Easy." Soren's voice was rough, sounding like he hadn't slept in days. "The healer said the wolfsbane was concentrated. You've been out for 48 hours. Lilith blinked, focusing on him. The Alpha King sat in a chair beside her bed, looking less like a monarch and more like a man haunting his own castle. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw darkened with stubble, and his golden eyes were dim with worry. 48 hours? Lilith rasped. "I missed my shift." Soren let out a dry chuckle, scrubbing his face with his hands. "You are obsessed with that restaurant. I bought the building yesterday. You can burn it down if you like." "I don't want to burn it," Lilith whispered. "I just wanted to be invisible." "That is the one thing you can never be again," Soren said, his expression hardening. He leaned forward, taking her hand. This time she didn't pull away. The spark between them was a steady hum now, a tether that felt terrifyingly permanent. "The council is here. My grandmother summoned them while you were unconscious. They are demanding an audience." Lilith felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. The Council of 12. The governing body of the supernatural world. They were old, conservative, and terrified of anything they couldn't control. "They know who I am?" Lilith asked. "They suspect," Soren said. "Valerius has been spinning tales. He claims you are a harbinger of the apocalypse. He says the return of the Valorian line signals the breaking of the Great Seal." "The Great Seal is a myth," Lilith argued, sitting up despite the dizziness. "It's a bedtime story to keep pups from wandering into the dark lands." "Myths have a funny way of becoming real when you show up," Soren countered. He stood, pacing the small infirmary room. "They want to trial you, Lilith. They want to test your blood. If it proves you are of the House of Valoria, they will execute me," she finished. The Valorian line had been purged for a reason. They were the only ones who could command the Alphas. To the current ruling class, a Valorian was a walking nuclear weapon. "I won't let them," Soren vowed, turning to her. The intensity in his gaze stole the air from her lungs. "But I cannot fight the entire world alone. I need you to stand. I need you to be what you were hiding." "A queen?" Lilith asked bitterly. "No," Soren said, walking back to the bed and cupping her face with his large, warm hands. "My equal. My partner." The door opened, and a servant entered carrying a garment bag. Soren stepped back, his mask of command sliding back into place. "Get dressed," Soren said. "If we are going to walk into a den of vipers, you should look like the one who owns the fangs." Lilith opened the bag. Inside was not a uniform, nor a prisoner's tunic. It was a gown of midnight blue silk, structured like armor, with silver threading that looked like constellations. It was a dress for a woman who intended to rule. She looked at the dress, then at her reflection in the mirror. The waitress was dead. The girl who hid in the grease and steam was gone. Lilith Vane pulled on the silk. It fit like a second skin. She felt the ancient magic in her blood respond to the silver thread. She straightened her spine, ignoring the pain in her leg. "Let them come," she whispered in Old Valoria. Venrock. The grand hall of Obsidian Hall was designed to intimidate. Massive pillars of black stone rose to a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Today, the hall was filled with the Council of 12, ancient alphas and high mages seated on a raised tribunal. Below them, a gallery of nobles, including a pale and trembling Lady Alara, watched with bated breath. Soren led Lilith into the center of the room. He walked beside her, not in front of her. A statement. "Step forward, the accused," High Priest Valerius intoned. He stood at the center of the tribunal, looking down his nose. "State your name and lineage." Lilith looked up. The silence in the hall was suffocating. Every eye was on her. "I am Lilith," she said, her voice clear. "My lineage is my own business." "Insolence," one of the council members, a scarred alpha named Kael, barked. "You stand before the 12. You will answer, or we will strip the truth from your mind." "You can try," Soren growled, his alpha aura flaring, causing the torches on the walls to flicker. "But the first man who tries to enter her mind will lose his head." "Peace, King Soren," Valerius said smoothly. "We are not here for violence. We are here for safety." This girl spoke the unspeakable words. She shattered a Veritas stone. She is a threat to the stability of the realms. Valerius stepped down from the podium, holding an ancient leather-bound book. "The law states that any surviving Valorian must be purged," Valerius cited. "Their blood is tainted. Madness runs in their veins. They seek to enslave alphas." He turned to the crowd. "Do you want to go back to the days of slavery? To the days when one voice could force you to tear out your own throat?" Murmurs of fear rippled through the nobles. Lady Alara nodded vigorously. "She attacked me. She cursed me," Lilith laughed. It was a soft sound, but it cut through the fear-mongering. "I didn't curse you," Lilith said. "I told you to sit down. The fact that you call obedience slavery says more about your fragile ego than my blood." She stepped closer to Valerius. "And you, High Priest. You speak of the Valorians as tyrants, but who built this hall? Who forged the moonstones? Who wrote the very laws you cling to?" "Heresy," Valerius spat. "History," Lilith corrected. "You purged my family not because we were mad, but because we were the only ones who could stop you from hoarding the magic." She pointed to the great seal behind the tribunal, a massive circular carving on the wall, dormant for centuries. "You say I am the breaker of the seal," Lilith said, her voice rising. "I say you are the parasites who drained it dry." Valerius's face twisted. The mask of the benevolent priest slipped. "Seize her!" he shrieked. "Kill the witch!" The council guards, 12 elite warriors in heavy plate armor, drew their weapons. Soren drew his sword, a blade of black steel. "Come and get some." "No," Lilith said. She put a hand on Soren's arm, stopping him. "This isn't a fight you win with steel, Soren." She looked at the guards charging toward them. She looked at the hate in Valerius's eyes. She closed her eyes and listened. She heard the heartbeat of the mountain. She heard the song of the stone beneath her feet. She didn't need a spell. She needed a truth. Lilith opened her eyes. They were no longer violet. They were pure, blinding white. She opened her mouth and the world stopped. It wasn't a shout. It was a resonance. "Kol Ra! Halt!" The sound hit the guards like a physical wall. They didn't just stop, they were thrown backward, sliding across the marble floor as if gravity had shifted. The stained glass windows high above shattered, raining colored shards down like confetti. Valerius staggered, clutching his ears. "Stop her! Cut out her tongue!" He raised his staff, firing a bolt of dark, necrotic magic at Lilith. It was a cowardly shot, aimed while she was channeling. Soren moved faster than thought. He stepped in front of Lilith, taking the blast on his shoulder. He roared in pain as the dark magic sizzled against his skin, but he didn't fall. He stood like a shield, his wolf snarling. "Soren!" Lilith cried, her focus breaking. "Finish it!" Soren gritted out, smoke rising from his shoulder. "End them, Lilith!" Seeing Soren hurt tore something loose in Lilith's chest. The cage she had built around her power, the years of hiding, the fear, it all incinerated in a blaze of fury. She didn't just speak the old tongue, she became it. She levitated inches off the ground, her hair floating in an invisible wind. She turned her gaze to the council, to Valerius. Nivak Sol, Nivak Mor. No more lies, no more death. She swept her hand toward the great seal. Apra! The carving on the wall groaned. For the first time in 1,000 years, the stone gears turned. Dust fell from the relief. A beam of pure lunar energy shot out from the center of the seal, bypassing the council and striking Lilith directly in the chest. She didn't burn, she absorbed it. The energy arched from her, connecting to every wolf in the room. It was a forced link. Suddenly, everyone in the hall could feel what Lilith felt. They felt her fear, her loneliness, her truth, but they also felt Valerius's deceit. The link exposed him. They saw flashes of his memories, poisoning the last king, rewriting the history books, hoarding the mana for his own immortality. "He lies," a noble shouted from the gallery. "I see it. He stole the power." "Traitor," Lady Alara screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the priest. Valerius looked around, panic setting in. His authority was crumbling. "It's a trick, a mind illusion." "It is the Veritas," Lilith's voice boomed, amplified by the magic. She lowered herself to the ground, the light fading to a soft glow around her skin. She walked up the steps of the tribunal. The guards parted for her, bowing their heads. They recognized the aura. It wasn't the aura of a tyrant, it was the aura of a matriarch. Lilith stopped in front of Valerius. He fell to his knees, not by command, but by the crushing weight of his own guilt. "The old ways are not about control," Lilith said softly, looking down at him. "They are about balance. You tip the scales." "Mercy," Valerius wept, his power stripped away. Lilith looked at Soren, who was leaning on his sword, injured but smiling proudly. "Mercy is for the king to dispense," Lilith said. "I am just the voice." She turned her back on the priest. Soren ascended the stairs. He didn't kill Valerius. He simply ripped the high priest's medallion from his neck and tossed it to the floor. "Take him to the dungeons," Soren ordered, "and let the council know. There are new vacancies." The hall erupted, not in applause but in howls, a chorus of wolves acknowledging the shift in the pack. Soren sheathed his sword and walked to Lilith. He looked at her dress, now scorched at the hem, and her glowing eyes. "You certainly know how to quit a job," he murmured, pulling her into his uninjured side. "I think I just started a new one," Lilith replied, leaning her head against his chest. The weeks that followed were chaotic, loud, and revolutionary. The Ashriver regime was dismantled and rebuilt, with the Council of 12 replaced by a representative Senate. The Dark Lands were purified, the seal opened to restore magic to the earth. Lilith didn't take a crown. She didn't want a throne. She took the title of Vox, the voice. She became the keeper of the history they had tried to erase, teaching the old ways not as a weapon, but as an art. One evening, on the balcony of Obsidian Hall, Soren found her watching the sunset. "Thinking about the restaurant?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Thinking about the spilled wine," she smiled, turning in his arms. "If I hadn't tripped, none of this would have happened." "Fate is clumsy," Soren whispered, leaning down to brush his lips against hers. "But it rarely misses." He kissed her, a slow, burning promise that tasted of freedom and future. The Alpha King and the Waitress, the sword and the voice. They were no longer hiding. They were the storm that cleared the sky. Thank you for reading this saga of secrets, power, and destiny. If Lilith's journey from the shadows to the spotlight moved you, please take a moment to like this story and share it with your fellow dreamers. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of forbidden magic and romance that defies the odds. Remember, your voice has power. Don't be afraid to use it.